Hello, everyone. I'm Vivek Atray, and with me is David Gower, once again, former England captain, back from Pakistan in his commentary. And England versus India, the fourth test is over, the series is over. India have won 3-1 and qualified for the finals of the World Test Championships. And it's a fantastic victory for India. Lots to talk about, like last time when we previewed the fourth test. Now we're going to review it along with the series. David, lovely to have you here on Playwright Conversations once again.
Well, nice to be back. Sad in a way that it's the last one for now. Who knows? We'll probably find, or I hope we find an excuse to do more another time. But yes, the conclusion to the series you mentioned, I'm a little bit relieved in one sense, because I thought in the end that fourth test match was very much about the players and their performances rather more than the pitch. As you remember, when we talked about the third test, I, like many others, had reservations, to put it politely, about the pitch. But although the fourth test spun, or spinned, or whatever you want to call it, there was turn there in the fourth test. I think it was ultimately the performances of 3 or 4 very talented individuals who made all the difference. You referred to the fact that I was coming back from Pakistan. Well, I was on the plane back from Karachi when that final day was underway. And I sort of eventually looked at my phone. Modern technology, of course, you can actually get Wi-Fi on planes nowadays. So I eventually looked at my phone thinking, I wonder what the score is. And I was a bit shocked to see that it was all done, dusted, pardon the pun, and over, and that England had sort of rather collapsed. So, but as I say, at least it was performances, the key performances, that made the difference in that final test match, rather more than circumstances beyond the players' control.
Yes, David, that's right. And Michael Vaughan, before the test match, had put up a picture of him preparing perhaps for the fourth test. I mean, showing how the England players should do it. And he was batting on what looked like a farm land field, which had just been tilled by some animals or by a tractor, perhaps. So it was a bit exaggerated, but it was probably indicative more of the third test pitch, as you rightly said, which was a gross turner. This one was much more balanced. But what went wrong for England, despite the fact that they won 3 tosses in the series? They won 1 test match, of course. In the final test, I think it was more to do with the psychology and the mind. These 2 spinners had a stranglehold over the English batsmen, and on day 1 to get out for 200 was not good enough.
Yeah, that's about right. I think as ever, there are so many factors coming together all at one time. When you've just lost a test match heavily, when you're worried about spin, when you're worried about spinners, because let's face it, both Axar Patel and Ashwin bowled exceptionally well because they're very good bowlers. It's as simple as that. When these things are not going your way, and for instance, when you think about 1 or 2 of the dismissals, which were freakish even in the fourth test match, rather unlucky, not just a lack of skill or a lack of application. You kind of sense sometimes that things aren't going your way. But you're right. When you've just lost a test match or 2 badly, so second and third test matches have gone very much against England by big margins, then you're not going to be full of what I call confidence, or what anyone calls confidence. So it's immediately a battle. And you can you can almost tell, if you look back at the first test match on what was a very perfectly good pitch for 2/3 days, then Joe Root gets a whole stack of runs. The fact that he was inhibited by conditions in the next 3 games shows you a little bit of both conditions and the overall psychology. Because in the end, if you are very much aware that as captain and the leading player, that if you don't get a double 100, you're going to lose, because you cannot, in a sense, trust the other 5 or 6 main batsmen in your side, then that puts a burden on the one man anyway. But for everyone else, I agree, it's a big psychological pressure. And let's face it, playing spin nowadays is different. It's a point we made before. It is different because of the things like DRS, things like the umpire's attitude to what might or might not be hitting in the first place, which of course precedes DRS, and because spinners know what they have a sort of different line of attack now because of all that as well. And this whole thing about technique, because I was listening a little bit at times during this final test match to those talking about it in India. And of course, it's all very well to say that techniques have maybe got worse against spin, but I will make the point yet again that the way you play spin now has to be different anyway. and you cannot rely on necessarily the old methods. And if there is a bit of turn, we saw one or two people trying to use their feet to come down the pitch to the spinners. Well, you have to do that perfectly, because if there's a little bit of turn, or even if the ball is sliding straight on, you can get yourself in trouble if you're not reading the length. And if there's one thing that is key to playing spin, it is reading length. So it's reading it from the first few meters out of the hand. So you get the flight, you get the pace, and all that is computed by a top player very, very quickly. But if you start running down the pitch to someone and you're not there, or you get it wrong, of course, you end up in as much trouble as you do by staying in the crease and getting it wrong there. So it's a mighty difficult thing. Now, yes, with practice and confidence, you get better at these things. So if you're a young man like, for instance, Zach Crawley, and you have that 50 in the third Test match, that gives you a bit of confidence, yes, because you suddenly think, yes, I can do this. That it gives you a bit of a template as to how to do it. But again, you come to a fourth game, you go down the pitch, you sky it in the air. Any batsman knows that's not a good sign. However positive you're trying to be, sometimes you can be over positive, and it is that little bit of misjudgment that he will go, for instance, walking back to the crease, having skied it to mid-off, you haven't quite got it right. So you go and sit in a dressing room, you think, well, if I get in that same situation again next time, whenever next time is, maybe I rethink it. And everyone has to go through that. I was thinking, before we started today's program, I was thinking that, of course, in amongst it all, and we'll talk about those great performances in a moment, no doubt, but in amongst it all, it's not just England's batsmen who've had a few problems against spin. Even Virat, who is acknowledged as the best player in the world, give or take, best one, best two, best three. You can argue the point, don't need to do that now, but he is a magnificent player. Even he has got out cheaply to spin in this series a couple of times. So that, in a sense, highlights the problem, because, again, you have to get in, you have to get set. So a spinner, the quality of, say, Ashwin, quality of Axar Patel, if he gets you early, it's kind of just your bad luck at the time. If you settle, if you get in, we've all done it. Even I can remember way back now, even Sonny Gavaskar can remember, however much he wants to talk about techniques being different now or being worse, you can remember it takes time sometimes to settle in. And when you do, fine. You look a lot better and you feel a lot better. It's a very, very tricky thing.
Absolutely well analyzed, David. That's superbly analyzed. We were on a group talking about Sonny Gavaskar's 96 against Pakistan at Bangalore in, I think it was 86 or something. And he got out to a vicious turner from Iqbal Qasim. Tawfiq and Qasim were the bowlers. And India lost by 16 runs to Pakistan. But those were days of different, as you said, DRS wasn't there, so many things. But I want to just go through England's batting lineup in the current test and see quickly as to what are the players, who are the players who can go on and do well, and how did they, like you already mentioned, Zach Crawley. Dom Sibley, actually, in the second innings, I think he swept one very hard. It hit the short legs shin guard and ballooned up, and the wicketkeeper caught it. Very unlucky indeed. Ben Stokes in the second innings is lap sweeping, and Virat Kohli standing there. So that was a little unfortunate for him to do. But Ben Stokes played well in the first innings and bowled well in tandem with Anderson. So just the performances of the English players, one by one or broadly, if you could.
Well, I'm not going to go through everyone, I don't think. But Crawley I like. Crawley, I think, has a big future, because I've seen him make big runs, as we did last summer in the UK, and I've spoken to him a few times, and I like his attitude. I think he has a very what's the word for? He's very steady. He's got a very sort of calm confidence, which I like in a player, and he works hard. So I think he will go away from this tour, and he will look at himself, and he will come back again. I think he'll come back strongly, because I think he has the right sort of talent. Sibley is a slightly different case. He looks a bit awkward. But let's face it, he's got runs at times. This wasn't a great tour for him overall. But prior to that, this time last year, he was making runs, and you've got to give these guys a chance. Rory Burns, for instance, who had been in that position before, missed out a year ago in South Africa because of injury and stuff. Well, he's got work to do as well. It's the figures. I saw the figures. The Times of London published the averages at the end of the series, and they're shocking. It's the worst ever for the top three for what feels like thousands of years. I mean, they were absolutely shocking. And you've got to add into that Johnny Bairstow, of course, which is just one of those weird things, because Bairstow, a month before this series, was making runs in Sri Lanka. And we know about this rotation system. We know about the fact that he had to go back to the UK, or opted or agreed or was told, or any of the above. So he went back, came back to the Test series in India. And this is what the game does to you, sadly. You start badly, you lose confidence, you find it impossible to get a run. You get in for your final inning. Even at the end, he turns the first ball around the corner, caught at leg slip. Wasn't clever. It's not clever because your mind, your brain is scrambled, and that's how quickly form can turn. So from getting runs in Sri Lanka and looking good, and people saying, "Great, Johnny Bairstow's back in the Test side and full of confidence," you suddenly start a new series, new place, not far up the road, as it were. You just cross a bit of water, fly a couple of hours north, and you're in a new series. Well, things can change very rapidly. Right, Root, we know, has had a fantastic start to this year, but even he tailed away at the end, given the conditions. Stokes, you mentioned, we just know what Ben Stokes is. He might have had a relatively quiet series, but he is a major force. The keeping thing is interesting because Josh Butler, of course, went back after one Test match, rotation. So you end up with Ben Foakes, who is a brilliant keeper, a lovely, lovely keeper with a pretty good defense with the bat, but he's not going to Butler you, in the sense that Butler can attack, can change games on a good day, but you accept he's not going to do it every day. So when Butler is back, Foakes will go. And then for the bowling, well, last two Test matches of this series, we've had the wrong mix in both Test matches. Anderson still extraordinarily shows how classy he remains. Broad, I'm sure, still has a future, but these conditions for the game he played in Ahmedabad weren't his as such. The spinner. I think the most concern we have is that for England to do well in India next time, maybe in Sri Lanka, maybe in Pakistan, basically on the subcontinent, in Bangladesh as well, the spin isn't what it should be. Leach is steady, but nothing dramatic. He's a good bowler, but not quite of the class of some of the greats. He's got work to do to become a better bowler still. Bess, of course, bowlers also suffer from lack of confidence, and he's had a tough time. He's had a really tough time. But he is, I think, shown before, because when he first started, which is now, whatever it is, 3 years ago or so, when he first started, I looked at him at Lords in his first Test match, and I thought, this man can't bowl. He's just a very ordinary. He didn't have much experience. In the end, he got runs as night watchman, which has at least cheered him up a bit. But he couldn't bowl. When I say that, in terms of international cricket, just to use a slang expression, he couldn't bowl.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he has no mechanics, but he's worked hard since then. He's improved a lot since then. He played a part in Sri Lanka. He played a part in Chennai without bowling at his best. But then you lose a bit of confidence. You bowl a few bad balls, and your mind again is equally scrambled as it is for the batsman. So, and spin bowling can take. This is why I envy Axar Patel so much, because he's just slotted in straight away. It's a very good sign for him and for India that he can do that. He's bowled superbly well. Absolutely no doubts about that, and I have very few doubts about his future. There will be tougher times on flatter pitches for sure. But what you wanted was someone like Dom Bess to equal Axar Patel in terms of putting it in the right place more often. Because when you've got help, all you have to do, in a sense, not quite everything, but all you have to do in a major sense, is just find a spot on the pitch, aim for it, and hit it. Now, I know that sounds like an oversimplification, and it is, because you need a bit more than that. But Dom Bess couldn't do that. So again, he has got work to do to improve. But from things I've seen and heard, however badly it might have affected him over the last couple of weeks, I think he's going to be able to go back, work on his game again. There's not much competition. There are some younger spinners coming through, but again, we will have the same problem, because the young spinners coming through from county cricket do not have a slot to bowl in. County cricket is played, first-class cricket is played in winter, which is an exaggeration, but it's played at the start of the English summer and it's played at the end of the English summer.
Absolutely.
And in the heat of the English summer, as and when we have it for a couple of days, they're playing white ball cricket. So it's we're coming. Look at this summer. We've got India coming back to us, of course, and I would guess that the pitches will have a little bit of grass on. I would guess they'll actually be very good pitches, so it could easily be a very even contest. But for English spinners trying to learn how to bowl properly, i.e., in matches of 3, 4, or 5 days, there are so few opportunities now. So the only way they can get it is by going overseas, maybe going to coming to India, for instance. To be part of academies, whatever it might be, or to get experience in different conditions. Leach is lucky because he plays at Taunton where the ball does turn, and he's learned a lot by doing that. But Bess, who moved from there, has to find ways of getting overs under his belt, and the English system doesn't help him, and it won't help the next generation of spinners coming through because they'll bowl so few overs. So unless a lot of things change, there's been a lot of reaction in the UK suggesting various things that could change about pitches and the attitude to the whole thing. We're always going to have spinners that are not up to it.
That's right. That was very well analyzed. And I'm going to give a respite by going through the Indian team myself, and then you can let me know if you agree or you have any comments. Also want to add, like we were discussing earlier, you didn't mention him now, but we did talk about Dan Lawrence, and he scored 50 and 46 and looked a very composed and very measured player. What do you think about Lawrence?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, again, he's a man who, his supporters at Essex would say he's very talented and will become a very good player. Again, early days, but the fact actually, you're right. The fact that he's come through that final game with those 2 useful scores, I think it shows a lot of promise, because again, it means that for someone like him, if he gets back in that same situation again, he has a memory of how it works. He has that template, whereas the others at this stage don't. So that will be very good news for him. And what always happens in these circumstances is that you go back. As I say, the next test series will be in England. They've got 2 tests against New Zealand. It might not be at full strength, either team, because of IPL. And then you've got this flagship series again against India. So the return match comes very, very soon. And we know that even if conditions are different, and just reflecting on that awesome achievement in Australia to come back and win in Australia, we know that there are pace bowlers as well as spinners who are important to India, as well as, of course, good batsmen. So I think that's it's a big series to look forward to. Now, whether Dan Lawrence is going to be a part of that depends on what happens earlier in the season, depends on who's in form, out of form, depends on selectors either being brave or trying to move on. If they decide, for instance, that some of those people we mentioned earlier, like Bairstow, there's a lot of speculation that Johnny Bairstow might well have, unfortunately, played his last Test match. We'll have to wait and see.
That'll be tough.
Well, I mean, it can be a tough. It can be a very harsh game sometimes. You might be, in whatever month it was, in February you might be scoring runs in Sri Lanka, in January you might be scoring runs in Sri Lanka. In February, March, you're scoring none in India. It's a big difference, and selectors have to make tough decisions. So it'll be interesting to see what the mix is, first of all, for those New Zealand Test matches, given that I suspect there will be absentees and therefore opportunities. Therefore, if although not so much from the batsmen we're talking about, I don't think they're going to be involved in IPL. But there'll be chances to fight for places, which is normally healthy. So by the time, for instance, we get to that India series later in the summer, yes, you'll see some of these names again, and they'll certainly be hoping for conditions that suit their skills better. But it will be a tough series. So it'll be something to savor.
Absolutely, David. Very well put. In fact, it happens so quickly nowadays, all these troughs and peaks, and we'll easily forget by June what happened some of us might, or public memory is short. You might see Bairstow hitting, if he gets another chance, hitting a century against New Zealand, and things are different. So even the Indian players, Rahane scored that match-winning century in Melbourne as a captain. In this series, Rahane, Pujara, Kohli, all 3 were below par, not really did well. Rohit Sharma, who was not at his best in Australia, but still had some useful scores, he was really sublime. That 160 and then that 50 and then that 49. If you look at Gill, he was on top of the world with a debut series in Australia. Here he petered out. Something like Sibley, actually, because he got a score in the first test and then he didn't. If you look at India's batting, not looking in great shape. But then Pant and Sundar at 6 and 7, they come up with that partnership, they come up with the goods, and India wins. So going forward, India's batting also needs to work hard to keep that title with India, or win that title for India. How do you measure India's batting in the series?
Well, yeah, it's the eternal conundrum, because if you look at those players you mentioned just then who weren't prolific through this recently finished series, the fact that they were getting runs a month or two before that in Australian conditions, which, they're different, they're very different again, reflects both their ability and their character. So let's put it this way: you don't suddenly become a bad player. Eventually, you'll become a player who is not, you're not the player you were. That happens to everyone because age catches up with you. But it's not a question of age at this stage. So I would look at those top players and say, well, their experience, their talent will still be very, very useful in England. And of course, if you look back at the last tour that India made to England 2 or 3 years ago now, which actually, although England won it numerically quite well,
3-1,
there were lots of key. Well, there were lots of key moments that could have changed that around. But for instance, Virat, who'd had a previously tough tour of England, came out and showed that he'd reflected on that and played brilliantly, played superbly well. So, I would look to him again to try and set the example on tour in the next few months, come the summer. And people like Shubman Gill, well, look, again, you do well in one country. Ironically, you don't do so well at home. Does that suddenly make you a bad player? You might actually find that going to England is good for him. And I wouldn't. I've never won, because I made this mistake as a captain once, and I should never have done it. I should have reflected on it much, much quicker. But you can make the easy mistake, which is look at people who lose form for a game or two and discard them, and that is not future-proofing your team. That is not good management. If you've seen someone and you've seen the best of someone and you like that, just because they have a bad game. I mean, for instance, when Virat Kohli gets gets a duck, and for instance is bowled by Moeen Ali through the gate, do you suddenly say, oh, he's forgotten how to play spin? We're going to drop Virat Kohli because look at that. How can a top batsman get out bowled through the gate by an off spinner? Well, of course, it's just a moment. It is a moment. It doesn't work that way. So I mean, Virat is brilliant. Absolutely no doubt about it. The others, Pujara, has made a stack of runs. Rahane, as you say, character and skill, guts, courage, the whole thing, which you'll need in England at some stage. They are good players. They're good players. And until someone says, you're now 52 years old, we think it's time to stop. They've got a great chance. Sorry, another exaggeration. They're fine. But what you have from Pant and Washington Sundar is the absolute blessing of youth, naivety, and of course a lot of skill. And again, going back to something we reflected on from Ashwin's 100 in one of the earlier test matches, in the second test, when you're down the order, it's a different feeling. It's a different psychology to being in that top five. So you have a little bit more freedom given the situation. I mean, yes, it was absolutely brilliant to watch. I wish I'd been able to see more of it. Pant's exuberance, his innovation, his just some of the extraordinary strokes that we were able to catch up with. It just didn't seem to be a test match to him. And even when he got his 100, it was just, well, there's no didn't seem to be any thought of, well, hang on a second, I can take 10 minutes over this and make sure of it. Wallop, thank you very much. Hands in the air and a big smile. I mean, he's brilliant to watch. But you do have that little bit of luxury down the order. But Sundar, again, played exceptionally well. And these were men who were able to combat their conditions, to take control and play as well as they did under those circumstances, who obviously have a part to play for a long, long time. So if they are allowed, let's face it, again, when they come to England, it might feel a bit different. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to make any predictions as such about pitches, but inevitably there will be grass, not long grass, because groundsmen, they make good pitches with with just enough grass to keep it interesting. That's for the most part. And I dare say someone somewhere will say, well, better to have grass than bare pitches for this contest. But so at some stage, you might find that Rishabh Pant is facing James Anderson again, and there's a bit more in it for James. Therefore, some of those shots he played at Ahmedabad won't be on. But it's up to him then to decide whether he's still going to carry the attack in the same way, still going to chance his arm, still try and dominate, or whether he's going to have to use another tactic. But I mean, yes, great to see. What it means, of course, is this: that India now know that they have the combined results of Australia and this series against England. They know they've got players with experience who can produce still. They now are equally confident, because when Pant went to Australia, as I'm sure, I think you said it last time, there were people who were thinking, why is he gone? There should be, it should be someone else. He's not good enough. And yet in the space of 6 months or less, he's proved himself more than good enough. So that's where selectors suddenly look at themselves and shake their hands and smile broadly, because they've made a decision and it's worked and the player has backed them up. So these things happen. But if you've got the experienced players playing well and you've got the youthful players playing well, then you've got one great team. So then you're in wherever you are, you're competitive.
Very true, David. And if you look at Pant, I was very proud to see the score sheets of a tournament that I organize in Chandigarh, which is the Vivek Atray tournament in my father's memory. He played here in 2014 and 2016 as a youngster. He's still a youngster, but he was a teenager, right? He scored a century in 62 balls in one of them. And he scored another century in the second visit. So this boy has so much talent. And India as a whole has so many of them. There's a Padikkal who played in the IPL, and you may have noticed him, a left-handed opening batsman in the UAE. Padikkal has scored 5 consecutive centuries in the national one-day tournament, which is on at the moment. 5 consecutive. And Rohit Sharma did that in the World Cup, I remember. But, I mean, we have enormous batting talent at least. But a quick prediction on the one-days and the T20s that are coming up against England, India versus England.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, good thinking. Well, okay. First of all, from having seen what goes on before, I mean, the pitches will be different. We're not looking at test match pitches. We're looking at one-day pitches, which, if they're prepared properly, will produce runs, because one-day matches, crowds want to see runs, TV audiences want to see runs. You want to see something for the bowlers. Bowlers don't want it completely against them, of course. But you will have 2 good sides, because England will be at full strength for their white ball sides. Likewise, India, I'm assuming. And England have more confidence, shall we say, in their white ball side than they do in their red ball side. But having said that, of course, they haven't been playing. They've been going through the usual formalities at the moment of the modern game, which is quarantine, isolation, little practice, straight into a series. So if they hit the ground running, then Owen Morgan's team is a very, very good team. Some of them, obviously, there is the overlap, the likes of Stokes for one. But there's a worry about Archer, for instance. This thing about Archer and his elbow for English cricket is a worry, because he is a man who they were hoping to rely on both in test matches and in white ball cricket. But if he's got an injury problem that turns out to be long term, then you've got a potential superstar who is going to be falling out of the sky all too quickly. But there are plenty of talented players in that white ball team. They have the competence, of course, of being world champions. You can't lose that until the next World Cup. But they're looking ahead to the World T20 later in the year. And they're looking ahead to the fact that this is going to be played in India, all being well. And I know, given the current circumstances, things can change, but let's just assume it will go ahead as scheduled in India. Therefore, this is very valuable experience about playing on Indian pitches, in the heat, all the rest of it, a few months ahead of that World T20 Championship. So, it's important. But you're on home turf if you're India. Therefore, you have home support, you have home incentive, you have all the advantages of knowing where you're at and the sort of conditions you're playing in. And of course, you're on the back of a test series you've just won. So as a nation, even though there will be changes in the 11, you want to keep that momentum going. You want to uphold the same values.
Yeah, there are people like Rahul and Pandya who are like just waiting and eager to get going. I can just sense them hitting it out of the park when the
Hmm.
series starts. But then Morgan is equally good and so many good players. But we're coming already to the end of this time period. What I wanted to mention was that the Indian veterans are actually playing what is called a road safety series. And they played a match against the Bangladeshis where Sehwag and Tendulkar got about 120 for no loss.
Hmm.
And they were like, Sehwag was 70 in about 30 balls like he used to be. Tendulkar was a little more sober, but he was not out. So, any chance that slightly senior generation could also be playing in India soon and you could be coming along and playing with them?
No.
That's a good one.
It's there are very few questions in this world that I know the answer to directly. There are two I do know the answer to. One is, would you like a game of cricket? And one is, would you like a game of golf? The correct answer to
Mhm.
both is no. And I've got both answers wrong a couple of times in the last decade and regretted it. I played a game in Cape Town for the Lord's Taverners this time last year,
Uh-huh.
which was almost started to enjoy it, but you get out. And that's against club side. No, it's fantasy. It's pure fantasy. It's people,
Pure
dare I
fantasy,
say,
yeah.
being very kind because we all remember. I mean, I remember my playing days, and I remember what they felt like, and it felt very different to what I did a year ago in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And I have never had this ambition to sort of keep the whole thing going, till one dies, because it just doesn't work. The reason I retired from playing cricket is because I wasn't as good as I wanted to be anymore, and I have absolutely no intention of putting myself out somewhere there just to fail and feel rubbish at the end of it. It's ignominious to try and pretend that you can still produce what you did 30 years
Yeah,
ago
that's true. That's
just
true.
because you
That's
strap
true.
a pair of pads on and take a bat out with you. I was amazed actually that Sachin was even playing in that series.
Yes.
What's in it for him? I mean, it's extraordinary. Okay, there are players, there are people who, for some reason, quite like to try it again, and because I've seen a few of them, and they carry on with high standards, and they work hard to make sure that they don't fail. But I have no idea why Sachin's playing in that. Nor Sehwag for that matter. Okay, I know it's a generational thing, but anyway, to answer your question, thank you very much for remembering, but no thanks. And if you want to play a game of golf, find someone else.
We'll find your reruns and watch you driving it through the covers whenever we want.
That'll do.
Back to 1980s, and we'll watch
Mm.
that. But David, you're in great commentating form, so I know you enjoyed Pakistan. We hope that you come to India for some series or the World Cup or something. We'll look really forward to that. I know you mentioned Moin Khan instead of Moin Ali by mistake. Maybe you met bumped into Moin over there in Pakistan, uh,
So,
but.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, you saw him. So more commentating to you, and you're absolutely a brilliant commentator. Let me compliment you.
Well,
How
Vivek,
does it
thank you.
feel to be in the
Mm.
middle of it? Yeah,
Well,
yeah. Go
thank you for
ahead.
that. I mean, it was. I mean, it's been because my involvement at Sky finished 18 months ago, give or take. It was the first time I'd been back into that environment. I loved it. I'd have to say it was fun. It was going well. I think the response I got in Pakistan was outstanding. And also, when you look at things like, I mean, social media being what it is nowadays, those that were watching seem to be quite enjoying it again. So at least it proves to me, if no one else, that that the ability to analyze, speak, describe, amuse, all these things which are part of commentary at its best, they're still there. So that was my advert, as it were, to get in back into commentary boxes. I know that given the various teams around the world that operate at the moment, and various things that are put in place already, I had put out feelers to BCCI TV to see if there was a slot anywhere during the Test series, and there wasn't. So it's these things are in the hands of those that have the power to decide. We are at the end, as ever, as we were as players, we are in the hands of the selectors. It's as simple as
Selectors.
that. Yeah.
Well. Anyway, we wish you well. And there's a Mr. P. Cannonbilla
Mm-hmm.
who's commented that he met you in the early 90s in Bombay during the Test match. Good memories. I assume it's Mr. Kananbila. It could be Ms. as well. So
Mm.
anyway, on that note, we say goodbye to you, David, from this particular series. But we'll hope to have you back for another series later this year on Playwright Conversations.
Indeed. Well, look, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope that those who've listened in have enjoyed it as much as I have. And if there's an opportunity in the future, then let's take it. But all the best.
Look forward. Thank you very much, David. A pleasure and a privilege.